In the summer of 1945, Japan was already collapsing under the weight of war. Cities across the country had been burned by air raids. Food was scarce. Families were separated. And every night, the sound of sirens reminded people that the war was getting closer. But Hiroshima was different. Unlike Tokyo or Osaka, the city had escaped major destruction. Its streets were still standing. Its tramways still moved every morning. Children still walked to school. Workers still opened their small shops beneath the summer sun. Many residents quietly believed Hiroshima had been spared for a reason. Some thought the mountains protected the city. Others believed the Americans were saving it for occupation. Nobody imagined the real reason. High above the Pacific, the United States had spent years building a weapon unlike anything in human history. A secret project known as the Manhattan Project. Its goal was simple. Create a bomb powerful enough to end the war instantly. And on the morning of August 6, 1945, an American B-29 bomber called Boeing B-29 Enola Gay approached Hiroshima carrying that weapon. Inside the aircraft was a uranium bomb nicknamed Little Boy. At exactly 8:15 a.m., the bomb was released over the city. 43 seconds later, the world changed forever. A blinding white flash exploded above Hiroshima. Survivors later described it as the second sun. The light was so intense that people looking toward the sky were instantly blinded. In the center of the blast, temperatures rose to unimaginable levels. Human bodies vanished. Steel bent. Stone cracked from the heat. Then came the shockwave. An invisible wall of pressure ripped through the city faster than sound. Buildings collapsed instantly. Windows exploded into thousands of razor-sharp fragments. Wooden homes burst into flames within seconds. Hiroshima disappeared beneath fire, smoke, and dust. People who survived the first second stumbled into the streets unable to understand what had happened. Some had severe burns covering their bodies. Others walked silently with skin hanging from their arms. Entire families vanished in a single moment. Witness testimonies preserved in Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum describe scenes that sounded almost unreal. Children crying for water beside burning rivers. People wandering through the ruins like ghosts. Black human shadows permanently burned into walls and staircases where bodies had once stood. Inside hospitals, the situation became hopeless almost immediately. Doctors were dead or injured. Medical supplies were destroyed. Thousands of wounded civilians flooded buildings that no longer functioned. But the most terrifying part had not even begun yet. Because the bomb did not only destroy Hiroshima with heat and force. It poisoned the city itself. Hours after the explosion, thick black rain began falling from the sky. Rain mixed with ash, smoke, dust, and radioactive particles. Exhausted survivors drank it without knowing it carried invisible death inside every drop. At first, nobody understood what radiation sickness was. People who looked healthy suddenly collapsed. Hair began falling out. Blood poured from mouths and noses. Fever spread through the survivors. The city had become an open-air laboratory for a weapon humanity had never seen before. And while Hiroshima burned, the rest of the world still did not fully understand what had happened. After the explosion, Hiroshima no longer looked like a city. It looked like the end of the world. Fires spread in every direction. Entire neighborhoods vanished beneath smoke and ash. And thousands of survivors wandered through the ruins without understanding what had happened to them. The blast had destroyed roads, bridges, hospitals, schools, and homes in seconds. But for the people who survived the initial explosion, the nightmare was only beginning. Across the city, civilians moved toward the rivers. The heat from the atomic bomb had become unbearable. Many victims were so badly burned that they threw themselves into the water searching for relief. Some drowned immediately. Others died along the riverbank surrounded by bodies. Witnesses later described the rivers of Hiroshima as being filled with the dead and dying. Everywhere, people repeated the same word. Water. Children begged for it. Mothers searched for it. Soldiers collapsed while trying to reach it. Then, several hours after the bombing, the sky began to change. A massive cloud towered above Hiroshima. Dark. Thick. Unnatural. The smoke from the destroyed city had risen high into the atmosphere, carrying radioactive debris with it. And soon, black rain began to fall. Heavy drops stained with soot, ash, and radiation poured over the ruins. Many survivors believed the rain was a miracle. They lifted their faces toward the sky and drank from it desperately. Nobody knew the water itself had become poisonous. Inside temporary shelters, schools, and temples, the wounded filled every corner. Doctors worked without medicine. Nurses treated burns they had never seen before. And thousands of injured civilians lay on floors waiting for help that would never come. But something strange started happening. People with no visible injuries suddenly became sick. A young girl who had survived the explosion without major burns collapsed with a fever hours later. A man helping carry bodies began vomiting blood. Others lost consciousness without warning. At first, doctors believed exhaustion and burns were causing the deaths. But the symptoms kept spreading. Hair began falling out in clumps. Purple spots appeared across skin. Gums started bleeding uncontrollably. The bomb was still killing people long after the explosion. Radiation sickness had begun. The survivors had no name for it yet. They only knew something invisible was attacking them from inside. One doctor later described Hiroshima as a city where people seemed alive in the morning and dead by nightfall. Meanwhile, the Japanese government struggled to understand the scale of the catastrophe. Communication with Hiroshima had nearly vanished. Entire military units sent into the city disappeared into silence. Then reconnaissance photographs finally revealed the truth. Most of Hiroshima had been erased. American officials soon announced that a new type of bomb had been used. A weapon powered by atomic energy. For the first time in history, humanity realized a single bomb could destroy an entire city. But even outside Japan, many people still could not imagine what nuclear destruction actually looked like. The survivors could. They saw it every hour. Burned children searching for parents. Bodies lining the roads. Entire families disappearing without graves. And through all of it, the black rain kept falling over Hiroshima. A rain carrying the ashes of the city itself. The fires in Hiroshima continued burning for days. From the air, the city no longer resembled streets and neighborhoods. It looked like a giant scar carved into the earth. Smoke covered the skyline. Bridges collapsed into rivers. And entire districts had simply vanished. When Japanese soldiers and rescue teams finally entered the city, many stopped in silence. Nothing in their training had prepared them for what they saw. Hiroshima was not merely bombed. It had been erased. Near the center of the explosion, almost every structure was flattened. Concrete buildings stood hollow and burned. Wooden homes had become ash. Telephone poles leaned over roads filled with bodies. Even the air felt wrong. Witnesses described a strange smell hanging over the ruins, a mixture of smoke, burned metal, and death. Survivors wandered through the wreckage like ghosts. Many were badly burned. Others appeared physically unharmed but moved slowly, confused, barely able to speak. Again and again, rescue workers heard the same request. Water. Thousands of people were dying from thirst, burns, and exhaustion. But many of those who drank contaminated water or black rain would soon become even sicker. Inside makeshift medical stations, doctors faced horrors they could not explain. Patients who survived the explosion began collapsing without warning. Hair fell out suddenly. Internal bleeding spread rapidly. Purple spots appeared across skin. Some victims screamed in pain. Others became strangely quiet before dying. Doctors later realized these were the effects of massive radiation exposure. But in August 1945, radiation sickness was still poorly understood. The bomb had introduced humanity to a new kind of death. Invisible. Slow. And terrifying. One Japanese doctor later wrote that Hiroshima felt like a city where death moved through the streets after the explosion had already ended. Meanwhile, outside Japan, the world was beginning to hear the name Hiroshima for the first time. American President Harry S. Truman announced that the United States had successfully used an atomic bomb against Japan. The announcement shocked the world. Newspapers described a weapon more powerful than anything ever created. But words could not capture the reality inside Hiroshima itself. Foreign journalists who later entered the city described scenes that seemed impossible. Human shadows burned into walls. Children wandering alone through ruins. People dying days after surviving the blast. Photographs taken after the bombing showed endless destruction stretching toward the horizon. Entire neighborhoods reduced to empty land. And still, many survivors searched for missing relatives among the ashes. Some carried photographs of family members. Others called names into crowds that no longer answered. At night, the city became even more haunting. The fires glowed red beneath dark skies. The wounded cried out from collapsed buildings. And thousands of bodies remained unburied in the streets. For the survivors, time itself seemed broken. There was life before 8:15. And life after it. Nothing would ever feel normal again. But while Hiroshima struggled to survive, another American bomber was already preparing for a second mission. Only 3 days later, a second Japanese city would face the same nightmare. 3 days after the destruction of Hiroshima, much of the world was still trying to understand what an atomic bomb actually was. Inside Japan, confusion spread faster than information. Some officials believed Hiroshima had been destroyed by a massive conventional attack. Others suspected a new type of weapon. But very few understood the true scale of what had happened. Meanwhile, the United States prepared a second atomic strike. On the morning of August 9, 1945, another American B-29 bomber, Boeing B-29 Boxcar, flew toward Japan carrying a plutonium bomb known as Fat Man. The original target was not Nagasaki. But heavy clouds and poor visibility forced the crew to change course. That decision would change the lives of hundreds of thousands of people forever. At 11:02 a.m., the bomb detonated above Nagasaki. Once again, a white flash split the sky apart. Survivors described the light as something unnatural, brighter than sunlight, powerful enough to erase shadows themselves. Then came the blast. Buildings shattered instantly. Factories collapsed inward. Homes burst into flames across the city. A massive mushroom cloud rose high above Nagasaki, carrying smoke, fire, and radioactive debris into the atmosphere. The valleys and mountains surrounding the city reduced part of the destruction compared to Hiroshima. But the devastation was still catastrophic. Thousands died instantly. Thousands more were burned, crushed, or poisoned by radiation. Churches, schools, hospitals, and neighborhoods disappeared beneath fire and rubble. And once again, survivors wandered through the ruins in shock. People searched for family members beneath collapsed buildings. Children cried beside burning streets. The wounded filled every open space they could find. Doctors who survived the blast quickly realized something horrifying. The same mysterious sickness from Hiroshima was appearing again. Victims with no visible wounds suddenly collapsed. Hair fell out. Bleeding began without explanation. The invisible poison had returned. Radiation. But among the survivors of Nagasaki was one man whose story would become one of the most unbelievable accounts of the nuclear age. Tsutomu Yamaguchi had already survived Hiroshima. He had been working there on business when the first bomb exploded on August 6. Burned and injured, he somehow escaped the ruined city and returned home to Nagasaki. On the morning of August 9, still weak from the first explosion, he attempted to explain the horror of Hiroshima to his co-workers. Then the second flash appeared. Another blinding light. Another shockwave. Another city destroyed in seconds. Yamaguchi survived both atomic bombings. Later, he described the second explosion as feeling like the sky itself had exploded above him. His story became a symbol of the unimaginable suffering experienced by the survivors. But survival did not mean escape. In the days following the bombing, Nagasaki became filled with the same scenes seen in Hiroshima. Burned bodies along roads. Rivers crowded with the dead. Hospitals overwhelmed by radiation victims. And beyond the destruction, another reality slowly became unavoidable. Japan had lost the war. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito addressed the Japanese people by radio. For many citizens, it was the first time hearing his voice. He announced Japan's surrender. World War II was over. But for the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the war would never truly end. Because the bombs did not only destroy cities. They left scars that would remain inside human bodies, and human memory, for generations. After the surrender of Japan, the war officially ended. The bombing stopped. The sirens disappeared. And soldiers slowly returned home. But in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the survivors quickly realized something terrifying. The atomic bomb had not finished killing. Weeks after the explosions, people continued dying mysteriously. Some survivors who appeared healthy suddenly collapsed. Others developed severe fevers, bleeding gums, and infections doctors could not control. Hair fell out in large clumps. Purple burns spread across skin. And many victims became too weak to stand. The world had entered the age of radiation sickness. The survivors of the bombings became known as Hibakusha, meaning people affected by the explosion. At first, nobody fully understood what radiation would do to the human body over time. Even doctors struggled to explain the illnesses spreading through the survivors. Years later, many Hibakusha developed leukemia, cancers, and chronic diseases linked to radiation exposure. Children who survived the bombings often grew up fearing what might happen to their own future families. But the suffering was not only physical. It became social. Across Japan, many people feared the Hibakusha. Some believed radiation was contagious. Others worried survivors would have children with severe illnesses or deformities. Because of these fears, many survivors faced discrimination. Women struggled to find husbands once people learned they had survived Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Men were denied jobs. Families hid their past out of fear and shame. The bomb had turned the survivors into living reminders of a nightmare many wanted to forget. Yet the Hibakusha could never forget. Every scar on their skin reminded them. Every August, the memories returned. The flash. The fire. The screams. The black rain. Many survivors spent years unable to speak about what they witnessed. Some remained silent for decades. Others began recording testimonies preserved in archives like Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum and Nagasaki Atomic Bomb Museum. Their stories shared horrifyingly similar details. Children begging for water. People burned beyond recognition. Entire families disappearing in seconds. One survivor described the streets as a procession of ghosts walking through fire. Another said, the city was silent except for voices asking for help. For many Hibakusha, survival itself became emotionally painful. Some struggled with guilt after losing parents, children, or friends. Others carried nightmares for the rest of their lives. And while Japan rebuilt its cities, the survivors continued carrying invisible wounds inside themselves. Among them were people like Tsutomu Yamaguchi, who dedicated later years of life to warning humanity about nuclear weapons. Many Hibakusha eventually became activists, teachers, and speakers. They traveled across the world sharing their memories because they feared history could repeat itself. They understood something terrifying better than anyone else on Earth. A nuclear weapon does not simply destroy buildings. It destroys generations. As decades passed, Hiroshima and Nagasaki transformed into modern cities once again. New buildings rose above the ruins. Children played in parks built where entire neighborhoods once burned. But the memory of the bomb never disappeared. At the center of Hiroshima stands the Hiroshima Peace Memorial, the remains of a building left standing after the explosion. A permanent reminder of the morning the world changed forever. And every year, thousands gather there in silence. Not only to remember the dead, but to warn the living. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki did more than end a war. They changed humanity forever. For the first time in history, human beings understood that civilization itself could disappear in minutes. A single bomb had erased an entire city. And after 1945, the world entered a new era. The nuclear age. The destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki shocked governments across the planet. But instead of stopping the creation of atomic weapons, many nations rushed to build even more powerful ones. The United States developed larger nuclear bombs. Then Soviet Union tested its own atomic weapon. Soon, a terrifying arms race began. During the Cold War, the world lived under the constant fear of nuclear annihilation. Thousands of warheads were built. Missiles capable of crossing continents were placed on alert day and night. For decades, humanity existed knowing that another global war might not leave survivors at all. And behind every discussion about nuclear weapons stood the memory of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The burned cities became warnings to the entire world. Scientists who helped create the bomb later expressed horror at what they had unleashed. One of the leading figures of the Manhattan Project, J. Robert Oppenheimer, famously recalled a line from ancient scripture after witnessing the first nuclear test. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Because after Hiroshima, the world could never pretend such power did not exist. Meanwhile, the survivors continued telling their stories. The Hibakusha became living witnesses to the consequences of nuclear war. Many dedicated their lives to peace activism. Some traveled internationally speaking at schools, conferences, and memorial ceremonies. Others recorded testimony archives preserved by institutions like Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum and Saka Gakkai Global. Again and again, their memories returned to the same horrifying images. The white flash. The black rain. The rivers filled with bodies. The silence after the explosion. One survivor said, "It felt as if the world itself had ended." Another survivor later explained, "The bomb killed people in one moment, and continued killing them for years." Today, modern Hiroshima is alive once again. Cars move through busy streets. Children walk to school beneath green trees. Shops and cafes stand where ruins once burned. Yet in the center of the city, the atomic bomb dome still stands beneath the sky. Broken. Burned. Silent. Not rebuilt. Because it exists for one reason. To remind humanity what happened there. Every year on August 6th, bells ring across Hiroshima at exactly 8:15 a.m. The exact moment the bomb exploded. Thousands gather in silence. Lanterns float along the river at night while names of the dead are remembered one by one. And perhaps that is the most haunting part of the story. Not only the explosion itself, but how ordinary the morning had been before it happened. Children were walking to school. Workers were opening stores. Families were eating breakfast. Then, in less than a minute, everything disappeared. The atomic bomb changed warfare forever. But it also left humanity with a question that still remains unanswered. Can a species capable of creating such destruction avoid using it again? Because Hiroshima and Nagasaki are not only stories about the past. They are warnings about the future. Warnings written in ash, fire, and human memory. And nearly a century later, the shadows of those two cities still stretch across the modern world.